Hello and welcome to Thinking Aloud from WPNC and Go Donate, the podcast where we get together and share our thoughts about fundraising, advertising and more. We're here to help charities find new donors, keep existing ones, and make the donation process easier than ever. If you like what you hear, we'd love to chat. All our details are in the bio.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of WPNC's podcast, Thinking Aloud. Today's episode is called Shooting for Authenticity. And what we're going to be doing is exploring how we go about capturing real stories on film at home here in the UK and also abroad. And to help me talk about those things and explore some of the challenges, I'm delighted to have Maria Phillips with me today. Hello, Maria.
Hello, Bob. How are you? Are you well?
All good, nothing.
I'm personally very excited about the subject for today because authenticity, as we know for all our charity clients, is just so important. And I think what's going to be interesting, hopefully, to everybody listening, is that what tends to happen, certainly at WPNC, is that Bob tends to very much lead on the shoots at home in the UK. And I have I would say the privilege, really, of actually going on the overseas shoots and meeting local communities and filming DRTV for them. So there's a lot of crossover between how we would approach filming in the UK and overseas, but there's also different challenges for each area. So that's what we're hoping to explore today. We could talk for hours on this, or certainly I could. But the way that we've structured today is we're going to talk about three areas. One which is all about preparation before the shoot, how you approach it. Then what happens on the shoot itself. And then post-shoot, how do you keep in post-production that real sense of authenticity? So, Bob, we're going to start with prepping. So when you're preparing for a shoot in the UK, what do you do? Where do you start?
For me, shooting in the UK, absolutely the first thing to do is to really take some time to make sure that you've unearthed the most compelling and authentic story you can find. It's really important because the success of all your endeavors depend on it. But I would always suggest working closely with your client, working with their stories team and searching thoroughly for the best story that they have available. Often it's not the first story that comes to hand. It may take some weeks of searching and checking before you can get to it, but that is time well spent. And when you find it, you'll know. What you're looking for is a story which is, of course, demonstrably true, reflects someone's lived experience. It's also important to have a story that is easily understood by your target audience.
Yeah, and that you can explain in 60 seconds or 90.
Completely. It's very easy to get caught up in a story that's quite specialist, and that doesn't always make the most compelling film.
Yeah, keep it.
So once you've found that, then the other part of the preparation around the story is making sure that you have checked with the people involved that they're happy to be involved, because it is putting yourself out there. If you're shooting film for TV, they're going to be on broadcast TV. They could be on posters, they could be in retail, and you really need to ensure that they are prepared for that degree of exposure and are happy to do it, because the last thing you want is to get 2/3 of the way through a campaign and suddenly have a change of heart from your participants. But what about overseas? Is it very different for you?
I wouldn't say it's very different, but I think what I've learned from your side of it is this is not something that you can rush unless this is an emergency appeal that has to be got out very quickly because it's in the news. And I guess a different set of rules apply for that. You really have to take your time to find the right case studies. And I guess overseas, it starts even further back in that you need to find a country, and then within the country, the community and the project teams who will be happy to host you. I mean, they've got to match the proposition of the ad. And for me, I think you always have to think, what is the key message you want this ad to give? And what's the proposition? What's the call to action? And everything about that is exactly what we know works in DRTV, life transforming, a really tangible solution. Those don't change with overseas, but it can take a lot longer to find the right country, the right community, and the right project workers. So one of the things we always do is set up, Zoom calls a long time in advance, and we might have a slight long list, and then we just begin to narrow it down. And it's on the calls to the country reps, basically, where you get a sense about how they feel about us coming to shoot, because it's a very big deal for us and it's a very big deal for them. And it's really important that they understand why we're going to be there and what we intend to do.
The preparation period's quite long when you're planning an overseas shoot.
Yeah, it really is. And keep talking all the time, keep talking. And the other thing to bear in mind, of course, is that it's not just, are they happy to host you? It's things like, what are the weather conditions going to be like? You don't want to end up somewhere and it's monsoon weather, for example, and it's impossible to film. Also think about distances to get to the local communities, because it's very rare that the camera crew will be actually living in that community. So you'll have, quite distances to travel to get to the communities. So you have to factor that into the day.
Yeah.
And of course, you also have to factor in how long you're going to be there, because my experience is any longer than 5 or 6 days and a community will welcome you with open arms. But basically, like going anywhere, having visitors to your home after a few days, they're beginning to get a little bit fed up of it. So you've just got to be super sensitive. And sorry, before I finish, the most important thing that I've found is the community that you are going to be filming in. It's so important they understand what is going on, why we're doing it, and involving them as much as we can in the production. And we can talk about that a little bit in the next stage of actually filming. So yeah, quite a lot of planning in advance.
It's interesting you bring up the subject of the people who are going to be involved. Certainly shooting in the UK, I would always say that getting to know the key real people and the location in advance is really fundamental. And for me, this is, the first really important role of your director. What they need to do is to get to know the people who are going to be on film before the day.
Yeah.
They need to kind of earn their trust, because there's a lot of trust goes on the day. And it's a chance for us to think carefully about, things like their natural speaking voice and their appearance, because some regional accents are easier to understand than others, for example. And in terms of capturing authenticity, we want our participants, our beneficiaries, to look like they normally do.
Yeah.
So all of that is really important to get the director on board and involved.
And what you've just said just reminds me, that's something that I should mention about overseas shoots, which is often we're going into communities where it's invariably a different language to English, but often you get a local dialect that is not even the same as the national dialect. So it's so important to have somebody who can act as a translator with the people, the children, whoever you're filming, because as you say, Bob, it's all about trust, and it's quite tricky if you're filming overseas and they don't understand really what you're saying, or if it's translated not in a good way or in a different kind of way.
So the local project worker for you is really key.
Really, really key. And also it's really key that we say to them, we want people to really want to be part of this, because we don't want there to be any pressure that they feel they have to be part of it. If obviously if a UK charity is helping to fund a project, we want them to understand why. And it's just really important. And anybody who is in the slightest bit reluctant or shy, any children, we often end up filming children who are not comfortable with the camera. It's so important just to say, this isn't happening. Not happening.
Yeah.
It's all about respect. Wow.
So,
There's a hell of a lot of work to be done beforehand.
Okay, well, look, I think for both of us, maybe the last thing on preparation is about the location and different challenges at home and abroad. For shooting here, it's all about understanding the space in which you're filming. Is it big enough? Where can the cameras and equipment go? What sort of angles are you able to get? How are you able to have different setups so you can capture a variety of film? Where can you shoot B-roll? And there's also detail stuff that is important, like people who were on the shoot who are not in shot. where do they go? You've both been on plenty of shoots where you end up with 10 people huddled together in a downstairs hallway
Yes,
or
we've
a
had many of
tiny
those shoots.
kitchen. So what about overseas?
Yeah, well, I mean, the location is obviously very important, and we always make sure we have photographs of the communities, the local projects, seeing the environment. But you never know. I mean, I think in the UK, your director can go and do a recce in advance. I mean, that's normally not in the slightest bit practical if it's an overseas shoot, say somewhere in Africa, for example. So what you have to be prepared for in an overseas shoot is that you can't be prepared always, and you just have to be able to review it when you're actually there. We do like to allow, if possible, a day for recceing when we're there, just to work out where we're going to put the cameras and or the best environments for shooting in. I mean, that said, certainly for the shoots that I do overseas and for this authenticity, I go with a documentary crew, and it's very important that they're fluid, handheld cameras. We don't have controlled setups, or as very little of that as we can, because we want to be able to follow the action. We want to be able to take spontaneous shots. I know we have B-rolls, but I would say both cameras, and we'd normally take 2 cameras or have a local camera person. They're both equally important. So we're actually kind of following the path, if you like. We're following the individual.
Okay, well, it feels like we're moving into the next section of our chat, which is about the actual production, filming, and how that can go at home and abroad. So I think the first thing I would say to clients and other creatives is something that might sound a bit contrary, but fundamentally, what I would say is don't expect to shoot your script. Now, obviously, writing a script in advance is really important. It's really important because you're helping to define and condense the story you want to tell. But you're shooting with real people. And if you're having real people talking with their real words are not the words that your copywriter, however talented they may be, have written. So what we try to do is to ensure that the real stories that we're filming are told in the real words of the people involved. Often at the end of the day, we might also record the script as originally written, but that's sort of a backup. It's much more natural, much more compelling, and much more truthful if people tell their own story in their own words. What about overseas? Not with a shot list?
100% the same, actually. Sometimes I like the comfort of a very rough, loose script from my own point of view, because you kind of know what the end goal is with that. But what we're very keen on doing is preparing shot lists in advance rather than storyboards. And I have to say, slight aside, but we've had several charity clients come to us with an overseas ad that was quite expensive and involved a lot of work from people that hadn't worked for them. And they said, can we re-edit it? And we went back to the rushes, and what had clearly happened was a storyboard had been shot. So you might storyboard something in the UK, and then you go overseas and you point your camera and you film that storyboard. But what happens there is you have no wriggle room whatsoever. First of all, in my opinion, it's not authentic because you're bringing to life a storyboard that was created in the UK. But actually, and you never know what you're going to get, so you're always having to be on the hoof. But more importantly, you're just not getting enough footage. It takes a lot of planning to organise an overseas shoot, and to actually end up with only enough footage for one ad that sadly hasn't worked very well. I don't think anybody is happy with that. So what I would do is have a script in my mind, but also have quite a detailed shot list in advance.
Yeah.
And we'd also demonstrate that with photos as well in our heads, just to sort of imagine the kind of shots we want. So they're long shot lists and there's a lot to cover, but at least it gives you that wriggle room. And also when you've shot, you can actually see, well, what's the best footage? What's the best stories? What's the best case study? You might shoot, a couple of case studies, and then how can we build a story around that? So does that feel a little bit similar in some ways?
It's sort of similar and different. Yeah. And I suppose another subject that's similar and different for both of us is about the number of people on set.
Yes.
So shooting in the UK, what I would always say is that one has to be careful about not having too many people on set. I mean, too many people who aren't appearing in the film. And just to give some context to that, for the real people you're filming, being filmed is a really unnatural experience, and it makes a lot of people very nervous. And the more people they've got standing around behind the camera staring at them, the more nervous they're going to be and the more difficult it's going to be to get a natural performance out of them. So when we're shooting in the UK, we try and have any people who were on the shoot but not actively involved in filming it either in another room where they're out of sight of the people being filmed, or something that we pioneered during COVID is we'll have Teams chat with a live feed from the cameras. So on Teams, clients and other colleagues from the agency can actually see what we're seeing through the camera and review and comment through that channel. And it just means there's less people who are there to make your beneficiaries, your storytellers feel even more nervous than they already are. I suppose controlling the number of people in the shot is a real challenge overseas.
It is. And obviously you are going to attract a lot of attention because you're filming. Everyone's very interested, and quite rightly, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? And children particularly can be quite a challenge to keep control over. We do like to involve them in the shoot as much as possible. In fact, there was one very memorable shoot. I mean, you'll remember it, Bob, because it's quite famous in our agency. We filmed with a child sponsorship organisation, and the actual idea for this shoot, probably the most terrifying shoot I've ever been on in some ways, was that we would give cameras to the children and we would train them how to use the cameras, and they would do a lot of the filming themselves. We filmed some as well, and we filmed the children. But
quite a lot of risk involved
there
in
was
that.
quite a bit, and it was something we tried to plan in advance, but there's only so much. But actually it worked brilliantly. We again sort of selected the children who we knew immediately were the most interested in doing it, very curious, wanting to learn how to use the camera. And what was lovely was it was largely, a female crew, girl crew, if you like, because obviously it's very important for women to be, and particularly girls who are at school, to have that sense of empowerment. And yeah, it worked well. And a few risks there, but a few grey hairs at the end of it, but got some really, really good footage. But sorry, going back to the point you were making earlier, I mean, I was going to ask you on the actual shoot, I mean, how big a crew would you have?
We work quite hard to keep the crew really small.
Yeah.
And that's because often you're filming in other people's premises, in other people's houses, and you need to have as small a footprint as possible. And you need to be agile. So we'll try and go with a DOP, an assistant, a sound person, and a director, and then you've just got a producer.
Yeah.
So a small crew, but that means they can set up quickly and be able to not only shoot the main story, but to shoot a load of B-roll. So yes, so in the UK, we try to go with as small a crew as possible. Well, what's it like shooting abroad?
In fact, I would say even smaller than in the UK. I mean, apart from anything else, you're flying a team over, so that's not going to be cheap, even if you do it in the most economical way. But also, we really want to be as unobtrusive as possible in the local community. So it would normally be myself, who's there as a creative stroke director. You say DOP, but it's more kind of a documentary camera person that I'm used to working with on overseas shoots, and they know the way I work, and we have a shorthand for the kind of shots we want. But also what we've done increasingly, and it's been really successful, is a second camera person who basically is a local, or, hopefully someone who has lived in that community or certainly lived in the vicinity, who speaks the language, who understands the customs, understands if anyone has any concerns, can help put people at rest. And also, when filming somebody in quite close range, to have somebody who you recognise as a neighbour or as a fellow country person, that can often help put them at ease. So I know you may call that B-roll, but I don't really see it as A-roll and B-roll. But tell me about B-roll in the UK.
So B-roll is really, really important. I mean, you were saying earlier about not just shooting a script or a storyboard. Even though we'll have a script with us, we all know that when you come to the edit, what you need is B-roll that firstly gives you some elbow room so you can cut out of shots, so you can give context to the story that you're telling. But also B-roll becomes invaluable
Yeah.
later on when you're trying to, and it's something you referred to, when you're trying to not just make one film out of it, but you're trying to really get the most value out of the assets you're
Yeah.
producing on the day. So that could be, can we tell the story a different way? Can we get another out of it? What about social? There must be a load of social stories that we can do if we take each aspect bit by bit.
Yeah.
And B-roll is absolutely vital
Yeah.
to doing that. We often also have a stills photographer with us so that we can create all the assets needed for a print campaign.
I have to say the best B-roll footage that we ever had was when we went into a child sponsorship community and we gave the cameras to the girls to film during the day. But then at night time, we gave them, when they went back home to their families, we said, go and do your own filming. Just film what you want, film your life, film your family, film yourself getting, cleaning your teeth or whatever. And we got some absolutely brilliant footage back from the girls because, of course, we weren't there to sort of look over their shoulder. So they really did have the freedom. And there was some really lovely, lovely little nuggets that went into digital. So, as you say, there's so much more than just filming for a TV ad. There's all the social stories.
And also, it's the little detailed stuff that really rings true,
Absolutely.
isn't it? And I think your audience will sense the reality of those little throwaway moments.
Absolutely, because you could not write that in a room in London on your laptop or whatever. It's something that only happens when you're there.
Okay, so I suppose that brings us on to the final stage in the story, which is about post-production and editing.
Yes.
And from my point of view in the UK, what I'd say is start with the story that you captured, not with your script, because there's every likelihood that on the day you will have revealed details about the story that you didn't know before the shoot. You will have the story told in a really natural way by people who lived that story, and that is often much more compelling. And so although it may seem hard because you've got this script and you're clutching onto it and that's what you want to see done, the more exciting thing to do is to say, wow, this is our story. Now look at our film and how can we use the film to tell that story in the most compelling and interesting, engaging way.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly the same actually with overseas. We end up with, I imagine, even more than the UK, a lot of footage because it's often a 4 or 5 day shoot. So you can feel a little bit bogged down by it, or at least the editor can. But I think the thing for me that's very important on the overseas shoots is while you're over there, what I always do is every evening review what was shot that day, log it, say that worked, that didn't, and then the next day, you may have to reshoot some stuff or you may have to do something differently. But also you're really mindful as you go along what you shot and what you haven't. So you're almost beginning to do your own kind of editing down of the best footage, which certainly helps with our lovely editor back in London who faced with 5 or 6 days of full filming, 2 cameras. It can be a little bit kind of overwhelming. So,
well, I suppose as it's so difficult to go back and reshoot, you absolutely need to make sure that you've got everything while you're there.
No, you absolutely have to do. So, so I think, going through the footage, finding the best story, absolutely. Because, I think what script is a script. A script is words. TV is not just words. Words are very important, but it's what you're seeing that is the thing that is going to make the most difference. And I say that as a copywriter. So, I think in some ways be led by the footage. And then, as you say, you can adapt your script around that.
And I suppose what that means is that everyone involved needs to be quite flexible all the way through the process because, where you could end up with might be a much stronger film, but it might be quite different.
Yes.
From what you intended when you flew out.
I mean, obviously, we're very mindful with our charity clients that you've got to go through ClearCast. So it may be that a script has already gone through ClearCast before a shoot, but obviously it needs to be submitted again. And sometimes with overseas shoots, if we've got some quite strong footage or we're having to give some quite shocking statistics, you have to really work with ClearCast to get approval and to get the time that you want. But our experiences, ClickCast are very good. And as long as you give them enough notice and work with them to find solutions, they want the best for you as well. So
Yeah.
it's good.
Yeah. Okay. So I suppose the next thing to talk about is the role of sound and music and SFX, something that you and I have talked about on the podcast before, but just really quickly from a UK point of view, unless your ad is absolutely centered on a particular piece of music, the edit is the point where you need to decide what role music is going to have in your ads, because you should be editing to the pace and the emotional highs and lows of that music track. Now, that is a really subjective subject, and it can be difficult to come to an agreement with everyone about what the right emotional tonality of that music should be. But equally, it's really important to remember that music can have a fundamental effect on the emotional heft of the film you end up with. And then I would always say, don't forget the power of SFX. SFX can add drama, of course, but also it's really useful to add a sense of authenticity. Sound effects can really place you in a location and with a person. I mean, how do you deal with shooting sound and stuff on overseas?
Yeah, well, I mean, in the past we've brought sound guides, but actually the kit now is so good. The sound kit on a camera. So often our camera guys will shoot, and as you said, we're always on the lookout or the listen out for sounds. Some of our most memorable ads of running water to signify clean water, or a child giggling, and splashing around. Or children singing at school. I mean, we filmed the children singing. We hadn't even asked them to sing. They were welcoming us. So I think basically just film or sort of shoot all the different sounds that you can, because it really does add to the atmosphere. And as you say, Bob, it puts the viewer actually there. But the other thing I wanted to bring up was voiceovers, actually. And I guess the specific challenges we have are sometimes on overseas shoots, which is if someone is talking to camera, we want it to be in their language, or their own language, of course. So at that point, you would have subtitles. Or do you have subtitles, or do you dub it? And it's very tricky, actually, isn't it, with this? But my view is, for absolute authenticity, it should be subtitles, because you're hearing their voices and you're not in a rather patronising way, sort of dubbing it over in English. But subtitles obviously does add to the captions on screen, and it can draw the eye away. So it's something that you really need to think about very, very carefully.
Yeah, it's an interesting subject, isn't it? Because if you think about news reporting, for example, on the BBC, they might actually dub. You'd start to hear a foreign language, and they might dub an English voice over it, but they're being really clear that it's dubbed.
Yeah, and
or streaming services now.
Yeah, they do.
Loads of films where you can just turn on a English language dub. So people are more used to it, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. People are more used to it, and it's really tricky. I mean, but one could also argue that people are more used to subtitles as well, with all the, well, certainly the DRTV audiences, with all the great films, and TV series from various countries.
Yeah.
But no, I agree. I mean, I think it's a tricky one, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. And in some ways, dubbing does give you more immediacy because you're not having to read something. So I think it's something that you just need to think about very carefully. And then, of course, the other question, certainly for an overseas shoot, is the role of the voiceover in terms of the call to action. When we filmed with our children, and they basically presented the ad, they wrote the ad, and they felt only right that they, spoke the phone number or the call to action. And that was absolutely the right thing to do. But sometimes it helps to have a UK voice do the actual call to action at the end, because I think it just grounds it on the fact that it's a British charity who's working on behalf of people overseas. So it's something to think about.
I suppose the key to it is just being open and honest about why you're doing things.
Absolutely.
And not ever falling into the trap of trying to fake it.
Yeah, exactly. And
people will sniff you out, won't they?
You're right. And ironically, I think sometimes you can go so far in trying to be authentic that in a way it is a fake. Do you know what I mean? It's beyond authentic, and it's actually not getting across to a UK audience. And it's really important that you get your message across to the UK audience. So it's a delicate balance.
So the last thing I want to talk about is that even though we talked a lot about filming in terms of broadcast TV, of course, TV these days is really just the beginning. And it's really important on a shoot to be mindful that you're creating a pool of assets that are going to be used for all sorts of things. So we try to plan that quite carefully in advance. So we'll know whether there's a social media campaign, whether there's a retail campaign, whether there's direct mail, and we will have key shots that we know we need to get during the shooting for those specific use cases. So how do you handle that overseas?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's the same thing. Although, you know, we have limitations because of the challenges of where we're filming. So sometimes you can't always plan absolutely everything, but certainly going back to the footage that we need to capture. And by the way, we also capture stills as well. Our camera guys are super flexible, really. Come back with stories, because the thing about DRTV is you can't really tell a story on DRTV. You can give a taste of it. You can give the highlights.
Yeah.
But it's the stories. And when you're filming in a very raw documentary style, very intimate, if it's in a very different environment to the UK, it's really interesting. And what's getting all the additional information is really useful for is to be able to share that on social media. So, for example, what we might do on an overseas shoot is we'll dig deeper into the case studies. We'll film a lot more about the lives of the case studies and their families and the challenges that they face. But also we might do interviews with project workers who talk about the importance of the funds that are raised and how it helps transform lives. We could do all sorts of things. One of the things that we like to do, by the way, is we always like to share the finished films with the people that we've been in the community with. If
that's nice. Yeah.
That's at all possible. So, and we might put a little film together, you know, the making of. I know you do that in the UK as well, don't you? But it's almost like the making of the TV ad. And that allows us to feature lots of people in the community and the project workers who aren't going to feature in the TV ad, but it shows that we're all part of the same team. And we kind of send it to them and say, thank you so much for all your help. It really meant a lot to us.
Really nice.
Yeah.
I suppose that's the joy of it from a creative point of view these days, is that there are so many opportunities to tell a story in different time lengths, in different media channels and from different viewpoints. And so the whole point of the shoot is to come back with all the assets you need to be able to fully explore that once your filming is done.
Absolutely, because it's the same for both the UK and overseas. Once you've wrapped, you're not going to go back again and refilm something, or it's very unusual if you do.
No.
But I will say one thing just to finish off, though. We filmed it out overseas. It's been very successful in the UK. We've then gone on to do another ad, but the client has asked to change the call to action. It might be a different phone number, it might be a different text message or whatever. So we've actually asked the local camera person to go back into the community and do the extra filming. Although you're not going to go over, there are ways to keep things going, which is quite fun. And I think everyone appreciates that because it's getting your value for money, if you like.
Absolutely. Well, that seems like a good point to wrap up for today. I've really enjoyed talking about shooting for authenticity. It's fascinating, how it is both the same and different in the UK and abroad. I hope everybody's enjoyed this episode of the WPNC podcast, and we'll be back with a new subject very soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. Bye, Bob.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you found that useful. To hear upcoming Thinking Aloud podcasts, subscribe now. And if you think we could help you, get in touch. Our details are in the bio.